Why would the most powerful navy on Earth spend so much time worrying about some of the smallest armed boats in modern warfare? At 6:20 in the morning, in the Strait of Hormuz, with diesel hanging in the air, salt baking onto steel rails, and the first hard light of the Gulf flattening the horizon into white glare, that answer moved fast across the water. Before we go any further, comment "Hold the line" if you believe the US Navy should keep these sea lanes open. Because what unfolded when Iranian Revolutionary Guard fast attack craft surged around a commercial tanker in that narrow channel was not just another regional incident. It was a demonstration of a strategy designed to make superior naval power feel suddenly heavy, slow, and politically fragile. The setting matters more than most people realize. The Strait of Hormuz is not just water between coastlines. It is a pressure valve for the global economy, a narrow corridor where energy, insurance, geopolitics, and naval deterrence all pass within dangerous distance of one another. In 2022, about 21 million barrels per day of oil moved through that choke point, and around 1/5 of global LNG trade also crossed those waters, which means a tactical incident there can become an economic event almost instantly. Out on the surface, the sea can look deceptively open, but strategy in Hormuz is never about open water. It is about constrained water, compressed time, and decisions made under the shadow of cameras, missiles, and markets. That is why Iran did not build its maritime power around symmetrical beauty. It did not try to create a mirror image of the US Navy, because history already taught Tehran what happens when conventional Iranian naval forces stand up in a direct fight against American sea power. In April 1988, during Operation Praying Mantis, the US Navy destroyed Iranian targets in a one-day retaliatory operation that sank 2 ships, severely damaged another, and demonstrated with brutal clarity what conventional imbalance looks like at sea. The lesson Iran absorbed was not merely that American warships were stronger. The lesson was that trying to fight America on America's terms was a losing proposition, from the first signal lamp to the final missile splash. So the challenger changed shape. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy leaned into a doctrine built for confined waters, ambiguity, surprise, and attrition of nerves rather than attrition of fleets. The Office of Naval Intelligence describes that doctrine as an asymmetric approach rooted in geography, using speed, deception, decentralization, and large numbers of mobile units to harass shipping and overwhelm defenses through swarming tactics. These fast inshore attack craft are often lightly armed by great power standards, but that is almost the point. They are not supposed to look like a peer fleet. They are supposed to behave like a tactical problem that never presents itself in just one direction, on just one radar line, or at just one politically convenient moment. And that is where the real paradox begins. A destroyer is one of the most sophisticated combat systems ever put to sea, built to see farther, shoot farther, and survive harder than almost anything around it. But a destroyer in the Gulf is not free in the way people imagine power to be free. It has shipping to protect, rules of engagement to follow, escalation to avoid, aircraft to deconflict, civilian traffic to distinguish, and 1,000 pieces of information hitting the Combat Information Center before breakfast. In those waters, the strongest ship in the world can still be forced into a defensive posture by weaker craft if those craft arrive fast enough, close enough, and in numbers large enough to compress judgment. The witnesses in this story are not gathered around a ring or seated in a lecture hall. They are merchant mariners on bridge wings, squinting through heat shimmer, watchstanders staring at green-lit consoles, officers tracking bearings, insurers watching rates, traders watching energy flows, and political staffs waiting to see whether a maneuver becomes a headline or a war. Everyone is watching the same water, but not for the same reason. Iran watches for leverage. The Navy watches for hostile intent. The world watches for disruption. That is why the mood in Hormuz is never calm, even when the sea looks flat. Iran's Mosquito fleet is often misunderstood because people look at hardware before they look at logic. They see small hulls, exposed crews, limited endurance, and weapons that seem trivial beside Aegis radars, carrier air wings, or guided missiles costing more than the boats themselves. But the strategy is not asking a speedboat to win a duel with a destroyer. It is asking the entire system of small boats, shore-based missiles, mines, coastal observation, and political timing to create a bad choice faster than a superpower can resolve it. That is what makes the fleet dangerous. Not because each boat is impressive, but because together they are designed to force hesitation, split attention, and raise the cost of being the side that must protect everything. By the time most observers notice the boats, the provocation is already underway. A few contacts appear at first as ordinary movement in a crowded maritime environment, the kind of clutter every watch team in the Gulf learns to respect but not overreact to. Then one craft closes too quickly, then another matches course, then a third angles toward a vulnerable point on the formation, not necessarily to attack, but to force a turn, force a signal, force a camera shot, force the larger ship to reveal what it values most in the next 30 seconds. That is Tehran's public challenge, delivered not through speeches, but through geometry. The US Navy's response in those moments is easy to misunderstand from a distance. People want a clean script in which strength looks loud, immediate, and unmistakable. But real naval professionalism often looks like restraint under pressure. The bridge remains measured. Radios call out, bearings are repeated, weapons are ready without becoming reckless. That restraint is not weakness. It is the discipline of a force that understands one hasty trigger pull in a choke point can do the enemy's strategic work for him. Now slow the clock down and watch how the trap actually works. In the first second, the contacts are just points. Small returns inside a busy picture where fishing traffic, commercial shipping, and patrol movement already crowd the display. By the fifth second, speed and angle begin to matter, because a boat moving directly toward a ship says something different from a boat simply crossing its bow. By the 15th second, the tactical question is no longer whether the craft are present, but whether they are coordinated. By the 30th second, if they are splitting and converging from different bearings, the command team is no longer dealing with nuisance, it is dealing with design. In the first minute, the Mosquito fleet tries to steal the most valuable commodity in naval warfare, which is not firepower, but decision time. One craft can be tracked, two can be warned. A dozen fast attack craft swarming a tanker in mid-strait, as CENTCOM described in the May 2023 seizure of Niovi, create a different kind of crisis altogether. They can force a merchant ship to reverse course, pin a commander between caution and escalation, and make every second of hesitation look larger than it is, because the world now sees the scene through released video and instant headlines. The boats are not merely moving through the battle space, they are shaping the political image of control. By the second minute, the paradox becomes even sharper. The US Navy may still hold overwhelming combat power, but it cannot use overwhelming combat power casually against small craft interwoven with civilian traffic inside one of the world's most important shipping corridors. By the third minute, every approaching boat is not just a hull, but a question. Is it scouting for missile targeting? Is it bait for a response? Is it there to film an encounter, trigger an insurance shock, or support a boarding action farther down the lane? In a place this narrow, ambiguity is not background noise. Ambiguity is the weapon. And if the encounter keeps building, the larger strategic architecture comes into view. Knaz noted years ago that Iranian swarming tactics are meant to surprise, isolate, and prevent reinforcement or resupply while breaking the enemy's morale and will to continue the fight. The Office of Naval Intelligence has made the same point in more formal language, describing an approach built on surprise, deception, flexibility, and the amassing of many unsophisticated systems to overwhelm defenses. That means the boats are never the whole story. Behind them sits coastline, radar observation, anti-ship missiles, naval mines, and the simple fact that the enemy in the Gulf may only need to be lucky once to create a spectacular success. That is why the execution of this strategy rarely looks cinematic in the way people expect. There may be no missile launch, no giant explosion, no heroic soundtrack, no neat declaration of victory. Instead, there is radio silence from the approaching boats, uncovered weapons, course mirroring, sudden stops ahead of a ship's path, and the cold mathematics of collision risk. In the 2016 incident involving USS Firebolt, Iranian fast inshore attack craft maneuvered close, matched course and speed, and one sped ahead of the American ship closely enough to force evasive action. Nothing sank. No war began. But the strategy had still spoken clearly. You are powerful, and yet we can still make you react in our theater, on our clock, under our shadow. So why can't the US Navy ignore this? Because ignoring it would mean misunderstanding the real target. The Mosquito fleet is not primarily trying to destroy a carrier strike group in open battle. It is trying to turn sea control into a constant test of attention, discipline, and political endurance. It is trying to prove that even if America wins every major engagement, Iran can still impose friction on the mission that matters most in the Gulf, which is keeping shipping moving without triggering a wider war. That is not a tactical footnote. That is the strategy. The deeper teaching moment is almost philosophical. Operation Praying Mantis taught Iran that tonnage and elegance do not guarantee relevance in a confined fight against a superior navy. In response, the IRGC Navy built something less impressive to look at and more difficult to dismiss. A force that accepts vulnerability in exchange for speed, dispersion, and strategic nuisance value. The United States learned the opposite lesson. Superiority at sea is real, but in a crowded littoral battle space, superiority must be translated into patience, coordination, and relentless small-scale vigilance, or it can be strategically undercut by forces that look too minor to matter until they arrive all at once. And that is where the US Navy's professionalism becomes the real countermeasure. Not swagger, not theatrics, not the fantasy that every problem in the Gulf can be solved by firing first. The answer is layered surveillance, disciplined watch-standing, clearer rules, better small boat tactics, partner integration, escort presence, and the kind of calm that refuses to hand a provocateur the exact escalation image he wants. In other words, the way to beat the Mosquito fleet is not to pretend it is a fleet battle. It is to understand that the real contest is systems against systems, attention against ambiguity, and endurance against harassment. Years later, the logic has only become more relevant. CENTCOM said in 2023 that over the previous 2 years, Iran had harassed, attacked, or interfered with the navigational rights of 15 internationally flagged merchant vessels, a reminder that this is not a theory buried in old war college papers. It is a living method of coercion. Each encounter teaches the same lesson again in a slightly different form. A small boat can become a signal. A cluster of small boats can become a crisis. A crisis in Hormuz can become a price shock, a diplomatic emergency, or a military escalation before most of the world has finished its first cup of coffee. That is why this story spreads through navies, intelligence briefs, and ready-room conversations long after the boats themselves disappear back into haze and coastline. Sailors remember that the underdog in restricted water does not need to dominate the sea to shape it. Commanders remember that hubris is a tax collected in real time. And strategists remember that an expensive force is not defeated only by something stronger, but sometimes by something cheaper, faster, and perfectly designed to exploit the moments when power must hesitate. The lesson is clear. The US Navy cannot ignore Iran's Mosquito fleet strategy because the strategy was never about winning a fair fight. It was about making sure the fight is never fair, never simple, and never isolated from the political and economic stakes of the strait itself. In that narrow band of water, the side with the bigger ships still carries the heavier burden because it must protect commerce, preserve credibility, and avoid becoming the author of the wider disaster everyone claims.